All right, I'm going to explain something right now that quietly happened over the last few hundred years and why it matters so much for how people think today. For most of Western history, people assumed something very simple, that truth exists, that reason can find truth, and that this world we live in is intelligible. That means reality has a structure, that things have a nature. Good and evil are not invented, they're discovered. This wasn't just religious belief, it was the foundation of education. Think about the classical philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They believed that the human mind was made to understand reality. Education was about training your mind to see the world clearly. Later on, Christianity deepened that idea. If the universe was created by God, by logos, by divine reason, then of course the world would be intelligible. The same rational structure behind the universe is what our minds participate in. Thinkers like Augustine, Thomas Aquinas built entire systems around this. The assumption was simple. Reality is ordered, truth exists, and the mind, your mind, can discover it. Education, therefore, was about forming the intellect and the character so a person could live in alignment with reality. But then something started to change. Not overnight, over centuries. The starting point slowly moved. Instead of beginning with reality, philosophers began with the self. A key figure here is René Descartes. Descartes famously said, "Je pense donc je suis." I think, therefore I am. Now that sounds harmless, doesn't it? But notice what happened. The foundation of knowledge was no longer reality. It became the thinking subject. Truth moved from the world outside into the mind. And then another philosopher took this a little further. Immanuel Kant argued that we never actually know reality as it truly is. We only know reality as it appears to us through the categories of our mind. Pretty intoxicating. In other words, the mind doesn't just observe reality, it structures our experience of it. And at this point, the old idea that the mind conforms to reality had been flipped. Now reality was being filtered, even shaped by the mind. And then comes the explosion. Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche looks at this philosophical shift and says something radical. He says, if we cannot access objective reality, if moral systems are human constructions, then truth itself becomes a matter of power. Morality becomes creation of the will. And his famous line appears, God is dead. Now understand what that actually means. It doesn't just mean disbelief in God. It means the collapse of the idea that reality has a fixed moral order. And after that, existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre push the idea to its logical conclusion. They say, existence precedes essence. In other words, there is no given human nature. You instead create yourself. You define yourself. You author your own meaning. And that kind of sounds like a lot of social media shit, doesn't it? And of course, this idea slowly works its way into the universities. Education shifts. Instead of asking what is true, the question becomes, who constructed this idea of truth? Instead of discovering meaning, students are taught to construct identity. What do I want to be? Who do I want to become? All that stuff. Instead of learning how to live in alignment with reality, they're taught to dismantle structures. And eventually, everything becomes about power, narrative, and self-definition. And here's the deeper way to understand what happened. For almost 2,000 years, Western civilization believed that God was the author of reality. God authored nature. God authored moral order. God authored meaning. Human beings did not invent the story. They just participated in it. But over the last few centuries, authorship moved from God to the self. And you can see how intoxicating that is. You could actually describe the entire modern philosophical arc this way. A centuries-long reenactment of the moment in Genesis when humanity eats from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The temptation in that story isn't curiosity. It's authorship. You too shall be like God. To decide good and evil for yourself. To become like God. And that is exactly what modern philosophy gradually did. It relocated authorship from the creator of the universe to the creature he created. And now here's the problem. Human beings were not designed to carry that burden. Clearly, when every person becomes the author of truth, identity, and morality, chaos follows. If everyone authors reality, then nothing binds us together. Truth simply dissolves, meaning fractures, and people become anxious, confused, and disconnected, which is exactly what we see today. But there is another way to understand the role of a human being, especially the role of a man. A man is not the author of reality. He is a steward. A steward receives something that already exists. He protects it. He cultivates it. He improves it. He tries to understand it, but he does not pretend he created it. And this applies to everything: your body, your family, your culture, your faith. These are not things you invented. They're not things you created. They are things entrusted to you. Masculine responsibility is not about inventing meaning. It's about stewarding what has been given, protecting truth, building families, creating order where chaos tries to creep in. In other words, living as if reality actually means something, because it does. And once you understand that, you realize something important. Freedom does not come from pretending you are the author of the universe. Freedom comes from knowing your place inside a story that is far bigger than you and I and everyone else, and choosing to play your role well.